Yeah, okay, they'll have to carry it up. You know, Hayom Kotzar, Melocha Meruba. Okay. You know that Hayomim Oila Niskarim Venasim. That's what the Megillah says, that after Mordechai and Esther sent letters, they sent first letters, they sent second letters, and after all this was accepted and it was demonstrated to be Al Pi Ruach HaKodesh, so the Megillah says, Van Yomim Ha'ela Nizkarim Venasim B'chol Dor V'dor, Mishpacha Mishpacha, Medina Medina, Ir V'ir, and V'mei Purim Ha'ela Lo Yavru Metoich HaYehudim, V'zichram Lo Yosef Mezaram. Sit down, wherever you find the seat. Bring in the 4 chairs from the kitchen, okay?
There's a chair here.
So, there's chairs here, chairs there. Anyway, Moshe, how will you come? Anyway, you know that the Masechta begins that Megillah is Nikreis, Biyud Aleph, and Biyud Beis, and Biyud Gimel, Biyud Dalet, B'Tes Vav, Lo Pochas, V'Lo Yoseh. Not more, not less, right? And that's because of Lo Yavar. Right? Only on these days and no others. Okay? It always puzzled me a little bit. You remember that the Mishnah in Brachos begins Meimos Karnas Hashma Ba'avin, right? The Mishnah in Tainis Meimosai Maskirin Gvuraz V'Geshamim, right? The first thing that the Gemara has a question is Tana Heichekoi. Very good. You tell me there's a Meimosai Maskirin Hashma Ba'avin. What is the Shema? What is it, right? What is it all about? Or Gvuraz Geshamim. What is it? Maskirin, if it says that Karnas Hashma, Maskirin, Gvuraz Geshamim, so obviously it should come. No, it can't. So obviously there must be some source in the Torah, right? There must be some source in the Torah. And so the Gemara Tana Heichakoi, from what is the Tana basis on? Come, Moshe, come. Avram, give Moshe the seat. Okay. Okay. So, however, the answer to why the Gemara doesn't say it is a long as a complicated answer, but I always.
On the porch, you said the chairs?
There are chairs. The boys will get them. Bring in if you need. Bring from the porch. It always troubled me that there's nowhere in the Megillah that it says that there's an obligation to read the Megillah. Right? As it says, V'dibat bom, right? We know Krishma, or there's the Kriya for the Bikurim, the Vidui for Maisa Sheni. These are all, written in the Torah very, very specifically. So based on that, there are Masechtas, and based on that, there are numerous halachas and dinim that were developed through the Torah Shabbal Peh. Very good. But where does it say, we assume that there's a mitzvah sasei midivrei sofrim in Nevi'im to read the Megillah? Where does it say it? It doesn't say it anyplace. And indeed, in Daf Zayin, there is a Manda Omar, and that it says that Megilas Esther is Nemra, it was Nemra likra, likore, velo likosev. That the Megilas Esther, as we know it, written with the dinim of a sefer, is a darabonan, right? It's a darabonan. It's not. And the chiyuv is just as on Pesach, there's an obligation to Mesaper Yetzias Mitzrayim. So too there's a but obviously, and because of that, there's a mandama that says that Esther is Eina Metamis Yadayim. We know that the Chazal were goes there on Kisvei HaKodesh. The Chazal were goes on Kisvei HaKodesh at Tumas Yadayim, right? And that mandama doesn't hold that Esther is Eina Metamis Yadayim. However, to make it bekitzer, because we have much to discuss, I saw the answer is very, very simple. The answer is in Yerushalmi. but I came to it more than through the Yerushalmi. Rashi in the Megillah Gufa, it says v'hayomim ha'ela that after Mordechai and Esther were mitzaveh that the Klal Yisrael observe Purim. It says v'hayomim ha'ela niskarim v'nasim b'chol dor v'dor, that niskarim v'nasim b'chol dor v'dor, they were remembered and they were observed for generation, right? We spoke about Shabbos that Zohar Eis Asher Asa L'cho Amalek. The Zohar, the Sifri, it says Bepeh, Al Tishkach is Belev, and it says, and the Sifri says, just remember, Moshe, this was the Drosha Shabbos, that just as it says Zohar Es Yom HaShabbos Lekadshoy Zochrehu B'Dvorim, and the Kiddush B'Dvorim on Shabbos is Deraisa, so too the Zohar Eis Asher Asa L'cho Amalek is Bepeh. Okay, fine. Vayomim ha'ela niskarim v'nasim. So Rashi says here, B'kriyas Megillah, that the niskarim v'nasim is the kriyas Megillah. Why? Because this is the zikaron b'peh, and the zikaron b'peh is b'sefer, because k'sorev zoy zikaron b'sefer. So if it's niskarim v'nasim, so obviously, and the zeicher is b'peh, then it has to be metoch ha'sefer. And it's interesting, not in this chumash, but in my other chumashim, it says here that it says Yerushalmi Perek Aleph Halacha Aleph. I know that actually quotes the Yerushalmi, and that is the Yerushalmi right in the beginning of Megillah. That when the Yerushalmi discusses the various zmanim that the Mishnah designates, so the Mishnah says, so the Yerushalmi asks, well, why can't it be that maybe Yud Daled is for Suda, right? Tesvav is Lekriya, right? He says, no, it can't be, because it says, Vayomim ha'ela niskarim v'nasim, right? Niskarim b'kriya, v'nasim b'suda, right? So it means that the 2 days are niskarim v'nasim, for the Mukafas Chaim and Memos Yeshua Ben Nun on Tesvav, and the Prozim on Yudalit, right? But both Niskarim and there can't be Nasim without Niskarim, because Niskarim refers to the Kriyas HaMegillah, K'sov zo Zikarim B'Sefer, and the Zikarim has to be Bepeh, Mitoch HaSefer. What is a Sefer? The Sefer is a Sefer, as the Sefer Torah, Ka'amito Shal Torah. It has to have the sirtut, it has to have the tvira, and it has to conform to all of the halachas which are binding on a Sefer Torah. And it's very interesting, it's more than interesting, that you see that the whole Shakla V'Taya in Dav Zayin, whether the Megilas Esther, Medivrei Nevi'im, was nitna lekosev or not, or whether it was only nitna to recite Baal Peh, but it doesn't. We say midaraisa because medivrei neviim. That's what the Rambam explains in the Sefer HaMitzvos, that we call Megilas Esther midaraisa. And there's a mandam in the Yesham. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi himself says that the Megillah was given Sinai. It was given Sinai, and so that manda Omar, who says Shmuel, that the Gemara holds it was Shmuel, who holds that Megilas Esther was not nitn lekosev, and the ksiva and the sirtut and the tvira of Megilas Esther is the Rabbanon, and Tosfos says that there's even a mandama that says it's not even nitn lekosev kesefer Torah min. Oh, David, it's not even nitn lekosev Midrabanan, and the Mashah asks then Dav Zayin, where do we find such a mandama? There is no such a mandama. But Al Kolpanim, the Yerushalmi is mashmit the whole Indian, because the Yerushalmi learns clearly Hayomim ha'ela niskarim v'nasim. Niskarim v'nasim is mitoch hasefer, so it's not shaykh to say Al Pi the Yerushalmi did not hold that it was possible to consider that there is a mandama that says that Megilas Esther doesn't have to be written in a sefer. That's what that whole sugya of Dav Zayin doesn't appear in the Yerushalmi. Okay, just put it here for a second. In any event, the Mishnah says that the Megilas Esther is B'Yud Aleph, B'Yud Beis, B'Yud Gimel, B'Yud Aleph, and then the first detail is la pachas v'la yosa. The first detail is Krochin Hamukafin Chaimim Memos Yeshua Benun Karim Betezvav. Those communities, those cities which are walled from the time of Yeshua Benun, read on Tesvav. Right? Okay, which is what we call Shushan Purim. And now, Bisman Hazeh, there's only really one city in the world that we're certain was Mukaf Muhammad Mos Yeshua Benun, and that's in Yerushalayim. And that's there are other places that are Sophic, but that's the only place that there's Vadai. Okay, fine. So the Gemara, what the Gemara discusses, the obvious question is that in the Megillah, the Medina, ear over ear, Mishpacha, in the Megillah it's obvious that the Krochim, the walled cities, and the open cities read the Megillah on different days. That's obvious. What's not obvious is why it is dated from the time of Yeshua ben Nun. What did Yeshua ben Nun have to do with this? Yeshua ben Nun, no one means to denigrate or to minimize Yeshua ben Nun, but even the Yerushalmi says the Loshen Ma Inyan the Yeshua ben Nun Eitzel Megilas Esther. What? Where does it come? So the Gemara says that there is a reason. And there is an explanation, because there's a Gezerah Shav, it says, Al-Kein ha-Yehudim ha-Prozim ha-Yoshim ba'arei ha-Prozos, that those Yidden that lived in the open cities, the unwalled cities, right? Yehudim ha-Prozim ha-Yoshim ba'arei ha-Prozos, and remember that later on, there's a limit from Yehudim ha-Prozim. Prozim are the open cities, and we learn a Gezerah Shav, Levad me'arei ha-Prozi ha-be-me'od, because it says that in the Milchemes Midian, they conquered Levad Me'arei HaProzi Habe Me'od, and just as that was dated from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, so the Prozim of the Megillah are also Moshe Rabbeinu, but it can't be Moshe Rabbeinu because in Moshe Rabbeinu's time there was no Kedushas Haaretz yet, so therefore it must be in the time of Yeshua ben Nun, right? And Hamamid Talmud Hogun is Eina Meis, right? So Al Koponim, it must be the nearest that it can be. To be Mekayim, the Gezerah Shava is Memos Yeshua ben Nun, because Yeshua ben Nun was Mekadesh Eretz Yisrael, and from that time the Orei HaProzim and the Orei Mukafis Choma attained their significance. Before that, there was no significance, right? Later on, we're going to see, and again, that was the subject of a shiur that we had a few years ago, the Alkin HaYudim HaProzim, so why does it add Yoshim Ba'arei HaProzos? So that is already the Sugya and Daf Yud Tes, where we say Pruz Ben Yom is Kare Pruz, that there's a time that a person can travel from one city, from a walled city to an open city, and although he intends to return home, but he can be considered as a resident of the open city or the walled city. That's a separate drasha altogether. The boys are learning Megillah. Okay, fine. So the Gemara says, the Gemara brings after the Gemara establishes and that the Prozim read one day and the Mukafim Chama Mos Yeshua ben Nun read another day, and the Gemara thought that first of all, perhaps the Yudalad and Tesvav is optional. You want this day, you want that day, and the Gemara established definitely that there's no question that it's obligatory. It's not optional that you read. You have to read on your day, and you have to read on your day, and this is the way that it was set up. So the Gemara says, Masnisn de lo kahaitana, that the Mishnah our Mishnah is not kahaitana. The Tanya Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha Omer, that Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha says that Krochin hamukafin chomem memosach hashveresh korim b'chamisha osa. He rejects what it says in the Mishnah. He doesn't differ with the idea that the Krochin mukafin chomem read on another day, but instead of dating it from the time of Yeshua ben Nun, he dates it from the time of Achashverosh, which makes more sense. That would obviously make more sense, right? So my time of the Rabbi Yehoshua ben Karcha, Kishushan, Ma Shushan Mukefes Chomem Memosach HaShverish, V'Koren B'Chamishasa, Af Kol Shemukafim Chomem Memosach HaShverish, Koren B'Chamishasa. Right? So he says that this is a svara. He says that why would you say differently? Certainly it's dated from the time of Achashverosh. V'Tana did dan my Tama. Why does our Tana of the Mishnah disagree with Rabbi Yehoshua ben Karcha? Why does he date it Memos Achashverosh? He says, Yolef prozi. This is what we said before, because it says, Al kin ayudim aprozim, and there it says, Levad ma'ora aprozi chab me'od, malahalan memos Yehoshua ben Nun, afkan memos Yehoshua ben Nun. Okay, fine. So then the Gemara asks, Moshe comes to here. Then the Gemara is going to ask, and the Gemara is going to say, well, why does our Tana not agree with Rabbi Yehoshua ben Karcha? He says, well, our Tana learns prozi. He has the Gzera Shava. Why doesn't Rabbi Yehoshua ben Karcha agree with that Tana? After all, there's nothing stronger than a Gzera Shava. V'shlosh midas hatarin nidreshes ban kal v'choimim Gzera Shava. There's not stronger than that. And also, what we mentioned before in the Yerushalmi, that v'hayomim ha'elam niskarim v'nasim, that niskarim is the kriyas ha-megillah, and in that limit of niskarim v'nasim, if it's zeicher Basefer, so it means that the Megillah has to be written with all of the specifications and the requirements of a Sefer Torah, right? But it also means if the Megillah has the chomer, right, of a Sefer Torah, then it means that the Megilas Esther, just as the Sefer Torah can be dashened b'yud gimel milah shator and nidreshes b'hem, Megilas Esther is the only Sefer in the Nevi'im and the Ksuvim that can be dashened, right? The other svarim, that's why we always say divrei Torah medivrei Kabbalah lo yalfinen, and divrei Torah medivrei Kabbalah lo yalfinen. If it's a gilui milsa, but more than that you can't learn divrei Torah medivrei Kabbalah lo yalfinen. But the Megilas Esther is nitten lidorish with the Yud Gimel midrash atar and Rashes bem, because the Megillah says vayomim el niskarim v'nasim, and from niskarim we learned that it has to be a sefer as the Sefer Torah, and the Memele it's nitten lidorish. That's the Maimer in the Yerushalmi. Okay, so the Gemara says we understand that our Tana learns prozi. He has the Gzera Shava, right? Why, however, does Rabbi Yehoshua ben Karcha not accept the Gzera Shava? Why doesn't he accept the Gzera Shava? The svara is a gesund svara. The Yerushalmi says that it's mistaber to say that it's mimosach hashverish, but nevertheless, the svara gives way to the Gzera Shava. It has to yield to the Gzera Shava. The Gzera Shava is so. Listen what Rashi says, right? So the Gemara says that the prozi lagoma, that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Karcha did not learn the Gzera Shava of prozi. Uzukt Rashi, prozi lagoma Gzera Shava merabe. He wasn't mekabel the Gzera Shava. Vein odem don Gzera Shava ma'atzma ele im ken kibla meraba. There is no the Gzera Shava that it makes sense that you have two words that are identical or very similar. That's not sufficient. It's shloshesri midas shatar nidreshes b'hem, that it has to be a Masorah from Sinai, Moshe Kibbutz Torah Sinai, passing it on from generation to generation, that there exists, that Moshe Rabbeinu was mekabel such a Gzera Shava, right? And Rabbi Yehoshua ben Karcha says that there is no such Gzera Shava, right? Okay, and it says here in the there's a Mordecai Sefer and Megillah the Reach Dudayim, from the Bnei Yisachar, Hafla Vafela the Sefer, and he says, come Avigdor, come, and take the stool there, and he says that Avada, that from the Loshen and Rashi, and from the Loshen and Rashi, you see clearly that Rabbi Yeshua ben Kocha knew of the Gzeira Shava. There was no question that he knew of the Gzeira Shava. But the thing is, he wasn't Mekabel. No one had ever told him that this Gzeira Shava has the authority, right, to override the Svara of Mimos HaChashverosh. That's basically the shtickle Torah here. Let's see a little bit, instead of actually, because again the time, we're limited with the time, but let's see. The Yerushalmi brings a Tosefta. And instead of seeing the Yerushalmi, because in the Yerushalmi the Tosefta is a little bit, we'll see directly in the Tosefta. Okay. Krochana mukafim chomim memos Yeshua ben Nun karim b'chamisha asar. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha oimim memos HaChashverosh. Right, the Tosefta right there, memos HaChashverosh. Amar Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda heichen matzino l'shushan habira shemukafes chomim memos Yeshua ben Nun, which is exactly what the Yerushalmi says at Ma Inyan Purim Eitzel Yeshua ben Nun. It's like a rhetorical question. It wasn't, right? Elo mishpacha medina ir va'ir, right? That we learn from this pasuk that in the time of Mordechai and Esther they were masakin the medina ir va'ir, meaning that there are differences between walled cities and open cities. Okay, and they go on and he says that hasmuchen lakrach v'niran imo harehen kiyotzaban. He says another din, that there's another that we know that those cities that are samuch v'nira to a krach also read the Megillah on Tezvav. Okay, now listen carefully, because I don't have one day maybe we'll get to photostating, but we're not up to there yet. It says heichen matzino l'shushan abira shemukefes chomim mamos Yeshua ben Nun. Rabbi Yeshua ben Kocha says, what is it? Where does one come to the other? He says, so in other words, he could leave it at that, and you understand that Rabbi Yeshua, had he said no more, we would understand that he was cholek with the Tanakama, and he holds that you read the Megillah in the Krochen on Tesvav. He didn't have to say more, because he rejected obviously, although the Tosefta doesn't mention the Gzeira Shava, but whatever the reason of the Tanakama was, Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha didn't accept it, and he said that the Svara that the Svara compels us to say that the Kriyas HaMegillah in the Krochen has to be Tesvav, right? Okay. And this is Ela Mishpacha Medina Ir Va'ir. So we take that to mean that he's saying that I'm rejecting the din of the Tanakama that it's Memos Yeshua ben Nun, and I learned from Medina Ir Va'ir that's written in the Megillah that there are chilukei dinim in the various cities, and Memela I understand that those that are Mukafim Chomim Memos Yeshua ben Nun and Memos HaChashverosh will read the Megillah on Tesvav, because we know Yudalad and we know Tesvav. It's only a question of assigning which to which. Fine, okay. If you notice, listen very carefully again. I'm going to read it again because it's very, very essential here. It says that he asks the question that where do you find that it's Mukafes Chomim Memos Yeshua ben Nun? Right? It has nothing to do with it, right? He argues with the Tanakama. So he says, so I told you we could stop there. The Tosefta could have ended there. And we know that Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha argues, and he says that the Megillah in Mukafim is read on Tesvav. It says Medina, Mishpacha, Medina. That would seem to be however, he doesn't leave it without a limit. He says, I disagree with the Tanakama, and I have a limit to tell me that the Mukafim are measured from the time of Achashverosh, because Mishpacha, Medina, right? In other words, it's not only that I'm cholik in Svara, or that I don't accept the Gzeira Shava, which the Tosefta doesn't mention in any event, but I learned from the Pasuk Mishpacha, Medina Ir, that there's a chilek in the different ayoras, mukafim or not mukafim. Fine, okay. However, there's a word here that after Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha asked that Ma Inyan Shushan Eitzel Yeshua ben Nun, in the brackets it says here Ella. Ella mishpacha, Medina ir ve'ir. This Ella it says here the Minchas Bikurim, the Perish on the Tosefta says that this Ella was inserted into the Sefta text by the Gra, because the Gra said that the Gra held that there are two dinim here in the Tosefta. In other words, the question in the Tosefta is that the Tanakama said it's Tesvov, the Karachan Mukafim Chama. Fine. Why? Because it has no shaykhs to Shushan, has no shaykhs to Megilah, has no shaykhs to Yeshua ben Nun. Leave it at that. Then the Tosefta brings and Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha and Rabbi Yosef ben Yehuda is the one, because Rabbi Yosef ben Yehuda supported Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, and he said Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha is right, because where does Shushan come to Yeshua ben Nun? And then they bring mishpacha. So now, this, that if your gores the Ella, right, the Ella mishpacha, then it means that not like the Tanakama says that it's Memos Yeshua ben Nun, but Ella we learn from mishpacha Medina ir ve'ir that it's measured Memos Achashverosh. Ella, not like the Tanakama Zok Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, but Ella like Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, and just as the Tanakama has his drasha from the Prozi, right? Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha has his drasha from Medina ir ve'ir. Okay, that, and I made a little bit of a mistake before. That is the girsa not of the Gra. Okay, that was the standard girsa in the Tosefta, which the Gra didn't agree with. Okay. The Gra says that Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha and Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda stopped with the Svara. They needed no more than the Svara. Since the Tosefta anyway doesn't mention the Gzera Shava Prozi, so that's and Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha and Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda say that one has nothing to do with the other. That one isn't learned from the other. That's the end of it. Then the Tosefta goes on, and it says mishpacha Medina ir ve'ir is a separate din altogether, and that teaches me that those cities which are samuch and nira to the krach are also going to read on tesvav. In other words, that it's a separate din altogether. So if you goris the Ella, then that Ella is a continuation of what Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha said. That it's not as the Tanakama says, but rather it's as Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha say, because we learn from the following pasuk. If you're not goris Ella, then Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha's din, Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda's din remain very milsa de mistaber, right? Okay, it's milsa de mistaber. However, and then the Tosefta goes on and says, no, there's a second drasha, mishpacha, Medina ir ve'ir, which tells me the din of samuch and nira, which has nothing to do with that which preceded it. Okay, now this is very, very important because the Yerushalmi says that Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha and Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda Amru davar echad, because both of them disagreed with the Tanakama. That the Tanakama says that the Kriyas HaMegillah in the Krachim is measured by Memos Achashverosh, Memos Yeshua ben Nun, and Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda agrees with Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha that it is Memos Achashverosh. The two of them hold it. And it brings the Tosefta, and it doesn't bring the Ella, but the Mefarshim here, the Karban Ha'eda and the Pnei Moshe and the Yerushalmi say that there are two ways to interpret the Tosefta. that one says that it's too, that Rabbi Yeshua ben Koch and Rabbi Yossi ben Yehuda stopped after the Svara, and they said the Svara is enough to reject what the Tanakama held, and as our Gemara says, they weren't makabel the prosi, and then it goes on that Medina Irvia tells me another din, that there's a din of Samuch Hanira, okay? Zokt the Pnei Moshe and the Cong Beth Yehuda, however, there's another way to learn. There's another way to learn, which is the way without Ella, although they don't bring like the Minchas Bikurim, but without and that the Medina Ir Ve'ir is a continuation of Rabbi Yeshua ben Koch and Rabbi Yossi ben Yehuda. That why do I say Mimosach HaShverish? I say Mimosach HaShverish because Medina Ir Ve'ir, and this teaches me that the cities, that the towns that are Nira v'Samuch to the Krochim also read on the Nigrar, they follow the Krochim also on Tesvov. And that, how does that prove Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yeshua ben Kocha? So he says that they say the following, because what is the significance of the Krochim Amukafim Chomim Mos Yeshua ben Nun, or the significance of Mos Achashverosh better? Because at that time, the Yidden that lived in the Krochim Hamukafim were more secure. They were safer because they had the walls of the city to protect them. Okay? They had the walls of the city to protect them. Okay? And therefore, Zaktir Shalmi, that if the takona of Tesvov was an union of protection, as the Gemara is going to say later on, the suffix of Tveria, that maybe Tveria also is Tesvav because the Yam offered protection just like a Choma, right? So then the Samuch Nira, what in all times people that lived in the environs of the walled cities in times of crisis would find refuge, they would run into the cities. Right? So therefore, since it's Mimos HaChashverosh, and it's measured by the sakon of the Milcham at that time, right? And therefore they read Tesvav Mimos HaChashverosh, so then the Samuch and the Nira also have that measure of protection, and they also read on Tesvav. So there's a question, and this is exactly the gross point, what the Minchas Bikurim says, that do we say that Rabbi Yeshua ben Koch and Rabbi Yossi ben Yehuda hold what they hold mitzad svara alone, right? And they don't need any further proof to disagree with the Tanakama? Or do I say no, that they learn from Medina Ir Va'ir, and that Ribui tells me that the city, the towns that were Samach and Nira also read on Tesvav. Why? Because they also enjoy the protection, the added protection of the ear of Muktzas Chayma. Okay, so is it so in other words, what the Pnei Moshe and the Cong Beth Yehuda are saying is really what the Minchas Bikurim says in the Girsa of the Gra, that the question is if the Tosefta is one din or is it two dinim. Okay. The emes is that very, very difficult to understand. The Tosefta is obviously is a limit, on its own. However, we have to understand to try to comprehend this. We have to understand what was, and this is the Ran in the beginning of Megillah. We have to understand why did the Chachamim do differently, or the Nevi'im do differently in this mitzvah than all other mitzvahs? It's Torah Achas. So even the Ramban says, although there's no Losis Godedu here, there's no Indian of Losis Godedu, because it's not the Bnei Ha'ir when the Bnei Ha'ir live independently, the Bnei Krochim live independently. There's no Losis Godedu, nothing. But Talmud said that the Torah Achas, this is what the Ran and the Ramban say. So the Ran says that it brings also the Yerushalmi that the Inyan here was an Inyan lachloi covered le'eretz Yisrael. This was a time. This was at the end of the 70 years of the Golus Bavel. It was 7 years from this point. Achashverosh the Yovesh, who was the son of Esther and Achashverosh, would allow the resumption of the Binyan Beis Hamikdash. It was the end of the Golus Bavel, and therefore Eretz Yisrael was Chareva, and therefore Eretz Yisrael would have had no role, it would have had no mention in this nace. So therefore, the Chazal did, or the Nevi'im, when they were Mesaken, the Mikra Megillah, they, and Al-Pi the Psukim, the Mikra Megillah, they determined that there were different days for Krochem and different days for the Prozim. So what they did, instead of dating the Prozim, the Mekofim, from the time of Achashverosh, covered Eretz Yisrael, they dated it from the time of Yoshua ben Nun. Fine. Okay. It doesn't really answer the question. It's very, very difficult, but that's what the Ran says and Rav Rishonim say. The Ran brings the Ramban, and if I'm going to tell, not recently, but if I'm going to tell you that I saw this Ramban here in my lifetime, a long lifetime, at least 40 times, at least. And I never, why am I saying it? Because as Chatoy Ani Maske, I never had the good sense to look into the Chedusha Ramban Gufa. And evidently, the Ran did not have the Chedusha Ramban. The Ran only had a partial, quote, from the Ramban. Give me the Chedusha Ramban underneath there. And the Ramban asks the question. Where's the Ramban? I left it inside. Probably on the desk. Oh, here it is. Oh, no, I got it. I'm sorry. Yeah, here it is. Okay. The Ramban is a very long. The Ran reduces it to a few lines, and he quotes. It's an actual quotation, but he didn't have more than that, evidently. And when you see the Ramban inside the Osias Machimas, it's an entirely different, it tells an entirely different tale. The Ramban says, and this is a shita that the Ramban has here, and in Gittin also, in the Sugi of Pruzbel and Hashaleach, and the Sugi of Pruzbel, that the Ramban has the shita that although we say that at the time of Ezra, only 40,000 Yidden returned to Eretz Yisrael, the Ramban says that those were the numbers that accompanied Ezra, but from the time that Koresh, it was about 11 years before, sanctioned the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash, Rov Yisrael left Bavel and resettled in Eretz Yisrael and began building, and so therefore at the time of the Gezeira of Haman, you want to open the window? At the time of the Gezeira of Haman, the majority of Yidden lived in Eretz Yisrael. Okay? That's what he says. And what it says, that only 40,000 came back with Ezra, he says that was because most were there anyway. So if so, the begs the question, then why was there a knas, and why was there... It's a difficult, but this is the Ramban, is a consistent sheet, the Ramban, right? Difficult to understand, right?
I didn't know that.
Yeah?
My Amaratzis,
Right?
didn't know this.
No, I didn't know either. I'm telling you. I'm probably older.
No, it flies in the face of all.
Yeah, about historically, but this is what the Ramban says. You can see here in the Ramban, and therefore the Ramban says that the Gezeira of Haman. This is what the Ran misses, because the Ran didn't have this. The Ramban says that it's not a question that it was Mishum Kvodah Shel Eretz Yisrael. The Ramban says that the Gezeira of Haman was primarily against Yidden in Eretz Yisrael. Because he said that since, although it mefored ben Amim, but that was, the majority were back in Eretz Yisrael, and those living in Eretz Yisrael had the protection of the walled cities, And so therefore, their sakona was a lesser sakona than the prozim, and therefore, originally, they thought not to make Purim at all. Because Al-Kina Yudim HaProzim Oisim, and it doesn't say that the Bnei HaKrachim ever voluntarily made Purim. Right? And that's why, what the Ramban says, and Achronim say it, but they didn't see it in the Ramban. That the Ramban says that's why when the Gemara has a Salkedatech, and the Gemara says that maybe the Prozim are Yudalid and the Mukafim are Kalalo, maybe the Mukafim don't read the Megillah, they don't celebrate Purim at all. How could, the Gemara says, Valav Yisrael Ninu, right? So the Ramban, what was the Salkedata? What did the Gemara think? That they should not observe Purim. Why? Because their Sakona, the Gezeira of Haman was primarily against the Yidden in Eretz Yisrael. Many of the Yidden in Eretz Yisrael lived in walled cities, the Arei Mukvas Chaima. Those cities were not in such a dire Sakona, and therefore they need not observe Purim. And then the Gemara says, no, of course, that's not so, right? And on that, the Ran asks, the Ran brings a few lines of the Ramban, and he says, how can it be? He says, Adarabba, he says, the walled cities didn't offer more protection, they offered less, because you were bekifa achas with your sonim. You were with your enemies in a walled city, right? The walled cities didn't better your situation, they worsened your situation. But the Ran didn't have the full text of the Ramban, definitely, no question about it. I saw in the Chedush HaRan also, he brings only excerpts, he didn't have it, right? But the Ramban, the Ramban says, no, if the Ran were right, that Rov Yidden, as we assume historically, that Rov Yidden still remained in Golus, then of course the Ran is right that the wall of the cities offered less protection. It was more danger rather than less. But the Ramban is l'shitosan. The Ramban says that by the time of the Gezeira of Haman, Rov of Klal Yisrael lived in Eretz Yisrael, and they were occupying their own cities, and there were no goyim in the city. So Rov of the Mukafim offered very great protection. Then, that's the point that if you see in the Ran that the way that the Ramban is quoted in the Ran, you see that the Ran didn't have this. Then that the Ran didn't see that the Ramban's understanding was that the Ika Gezeira of Haman was in Eretz Yisrael. Okay, it was in Eretz Yisrael. So therefore, since the Ika Gezeira was in Eretz Yisrael, the walled inhabitants of the walled cities were in far less sakona, because they had the walls to protect them. And therefore the Gemara thought there was a salkadatach, maybe they need not observe Purim at all. Right? Okay? Which the Ran didn't understand, because the Ran's his Kabbalah is entirely different, and he holds that there weren't the majority of the Jewish population living in Eretz Yisrael at that time. Right? The Ramban says that when Mordechai and Esther established the Yontav of Purim, right, and there was no question that the Prozim were in far greater danger, because the Iker Gezeira was against those living in Eretz Yisrael, where the majority of the Jewish population was, right? Okay, right? Okay, that's where it was. Okay, so therefore, we thought that maybe the Mukafim, they were really not in, and so therefore, in subsequent years, Mordechai and Esther told the Mukafim, you don't think that you ought to make the Purim a celebration as well. You also have to observe Purim. Okay. So the Ramban says now that the inyan of should it be Mimos Achashverosh or Mimos Yoshua ben Nun is not an inyan. It's not a matter of great consequence, because the ikar is that the etzem gezeh. It's not merely, as the Ran says, that they weren't Yidden living in Eretz Yisrael, and the Mukafim certainly didn't offer any more protection. If anything, the inhabitants of the Mukafim were in a worse situation, because the Goyim lived with them in the walled cities. Where do you escape? Where do you run? Right? Okay? So why then, when Mordechai and Esther were Mesakin, that Purim has to be observed in the Mukafim as well? Why Mimos Yeshua ben Nun? It doesn't make sense at all. Because Eretz Yisrael would have been all as the Prozim, even Yerushalayim would have been as the Prozim, and because of the Genai of Eretz Yisrael, of Kavod Eretz Yisrael, they were Mesakin Mimos Yeshua ben Nun, although logically it shouldn't be that way. So the Ramban says no, the Iker Gezerah was in Eretz Yisrael. And certainly the Iker din of the Mukafim should be Mimos HaChashverosh, the Ramban says. However, since it's only an inyan of Kavod, because the Ramban says that if there was no, if those Mukafim Chaimed that Ezra wasn't Mekadesh when he came back, there's no Kedusha, there's no Din Botei Chaimed, there's nothing in those cities. So why do they have significance in the Megillah? So the Ramban says because this is a question of protection. It's a question of safety. So why do you go back to Yeshua ben Nun, who was Mekadesh the Aretz, who was Mekadesh the Kedusha of the Arei Chayma, the Krach and Mukfim Chayma, Linyan Batei Arei Chayma, and all other dinim, Shiluach Tameim, whatever is in. Why? He says it doesn't matter. It's not important because it's only a matter of covet anyway. It's not an integral. It's not an inherent issue. It's an issue of covet. Okay, fine. Okay. Anyway, this I'm trying to be mekatzer to. I use a watch once a year, Nila. That's all. The Al Kolponim, there is a significant difference among the Rishonim, the Ran and the Ramban, as to what exactly the Gezerah was, and what the significance was. There indeed a significance? The Ran says there was no more significance to the Mukafim other than the fact that Shushan was Mukaf. That's all it was. And everything else is because of Kavod of Eretz Yisrael. The Ramban says no, there was a very, very significant, because those that are in the Mekofim were much safer. They weren't in that level of danger, right? Not at all. And so therefore, they felt initially that they didn't have to observe Purim at all. Mordechai and Esther said they did. And it was determined that since it's only, should we date it from now, date it from then? So date it from then, but the Kavod Eretz Yisrael is an incidental. It's only incidental. Where according to the way that the Ran is learning, this is the Ika Takana was Mimos Yeshua ben Nun. Okay? And the Prozi, obviously. Okay. Fine. It comes out like this, that we said that in the Tosefta there are two ways to learn the Tosefta. The Gro learns two ways. There are two ways to learn. So the Tanakama said Mimos Yeshua ben Nun. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha said Mimos HaChashverosh, and Rabbi Yehuda agreed with Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha because he said Ma Inyan Purim, the Nes of Purim, to Yeshua ben Nun. And then the Tosefta wants a Medina, Ir v'ir, and there was a question whether that Medina, Ir v'ir comes to confirm that that's the source of Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha's din, and therefore, and we say, and not only the krach itself, but the nira and the samuch also, okay? Or do we say no, that Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha's din is svara ba'alma, and the Medina Iver is a separate, independent din altogether, which is the din of the nira and the samuch. If we say that it's part of the same din, it means it follows that since the reason that the Mukafim are different is because the Mukafim weren't in such danger, and therefore we give them a day later, so then therefore it would follow that those that are near and Samach were also in less danger. They also follow. Understand? So in other words, so what I'm saying is this, that if you say that the Tosefta is all one, that when it says Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha's din, Rabbi Yosef ben Yehuda's din, and you go like that, and you say that Medina comes to confirm that's the limit of Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, Why? Because their circumstance was the same as the Krochim and Kofim. They were not in that dire sakona. Okay, there comes out that that's the way that the Ramban learns, because the Ramban says that the Iker difference between the Mukafim and the Ayoras was that the Mukafim were not in as great a sakona. So the Yerushalmi says not alpi the way that the Gra is learning. The Tosefta says not alpi the way that the Gra is learning. That it says that, listen, that if the Mukafim have a different day because they were in less as a sakona, then it follows b'milsa de mistabra that the Nira v'Samuch should also follow the Krochim because they were also in that lesser sakona. If you say, however, that the din of the Mukafim, the way that the Ran says, is only because it should be like Shushan, so it says that the Mukafim should be like Shushan. That doesn't necessarily affect the Nira and the Samuch. But there happens to be a limit for the Nira and the Samuch as well. So those two Perushim in the Tosefta are tolui in the way that the Ran and the Ramban learn the inyan of the Mukafim. According to the way that the Ran learns that the Mukafim were in a greater sakana, and the Mukafim were given a separate day because only because of Shushan, because Shushan celebrated on the following day, okay? Then there's no reason necessarily to say that the Nir and the Samuch should follow that. Why? You need a limit for that. A special limit, but according to the way that the Ramban is learning, that the significance of the Mukafim was a genuine significance because they were in lesser sakona, okay? Then Avada, then it's Milsa de Mistaber that the Nir and the Samach were also as the Mukafim in lesser sakona, and they have to be, that whatever din applies in the Mukafim is going to apply in the Nir of the Samach as well. Fine, okay. I didn't do it justice, but you know we got to move on a little bit. Okay, so now listen. The Gemara here again, you know, after the Gemara brought the takon of the Nevi'im, and then it was a takon of the Nevi'im because we dashen zmaneihem, zmanom, right? And the Gemara brings that Rabbi Baba Chona says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that zu divrei Rabbi Akiva Stimesoy, that allowance that was made in the Mishnah for different days, you know, the Kfarim who are maktim, that was Rabbi Akiva Stimesoy. I'll explain in a moment what Stimesoy means, but the Chachamim disagree with the Mishnah, and the Chachamim say that ain't Koren Oisan Ela Bizmana. There's no Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel. There isn't. Okay, and that the Gemara asks it to Yufta. And then the Gemara brings another, an Ikeda Amrei, and the Ikeda Amrei says that the Chachamim say Bizman Hazeh Hola Mistaklim Bo and Karno Sela Bizmana, that there was Bizman, that they were Makadesh Al Pidaria. Then you could be makdim, the Kfarim could be makdim, the Kriyas HaMegillah, because the Eidim would come anyway, the Shluchim would come anyway and tell you when the correct day is. But Bizman Hazeh that we only have, that certainly in the diaspora, in the places when the Dochim, they knew to count from Purim 30 days to Pesach. So if you're makdim the Kriyas HaMegillah to Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, so the Amaratzim won't know it, and they'll eat chometz b'yomim achronim shel Pesach. That's what Rashi says. Okay, and that loshen is kayim. That wasn't. There's no tiyufta. Okay, what is zu divrei Rabbi Akiva Stimesoy? So Rashi says, we'll take the original Perish of Rashi. That we know that Stam Mishnah is Reb Meir, the Stam Tosefta is Reb Nechemia, the Stam Sifri is Rabbi Yehuda, the Stam Safra is Rabbi Yehuda, Stam Sifri is Rabbi Nechemia. We know, and Kula Naliba de Rabbi Akiva, because all of the Stam, or wherever we have a Stam Mishnah, the Stam Mishnah is Rabbi Meir was a Talmud of Rabbi Akiva, so everything was Aliba de Rabbi Akiva, right? Everything was Aliba de Rabbi Akiva. Okay. Rabbi Yochanan said that zu divrei Rabbi Akiva Stimesoy, that you can be maktam liyom haknisa. This zu divrei Rabbi Akiva Stimesoy, and the Chachamim disagree, and that was a tiyufta. And in the second lashon, the Gemara says bizman hazeh, they disagree, right? but no one questioned the etzem Rabbi Akiva's din based on the psukim is that you're but al koponim the Mishnah goes according to Rabbi Akiva, right? Okay, fine. The Mishnah is Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva's Timisar. Right. Here we come in. Some of you may have heard this from me before. I've mentioned this before. But different answers, and maybe I never really had a good answer. Al Koponim, is you have this Seder Adoros here. Al Koponim, you remember the Mishnah says in Kedushin and Daf Chavtes, the Bryce actually says, that the Gedorim of Kibbud Av, one of the Gedorim of Kibbud Av is Kibbud and Mara is Enososeres Dvorov. Okay, you don't contradict. Now, what does this mean? So, the Tur and the Mechaber and Reish Mem that you are not allowed to contradict your father in learning. What? Right? You're not allowed to contradict your father in learning. Okay. So obviously it can be because you see that all the Tanoim, the Amoraim, but Al Koponim, the Shach says, the Shach there in Daled, you take a look that the Shach says, why are you laughing, Akiva? The Shach says that even Shaloi Befonov, even so, all of the Achronim argue with the Shach and said, where's the measure? Why not Shaloi? But Al Koponim, the Eino Soseres Dvorov to argue with the father in learning, but is very okay. Obviously, it can't. This in itself requires a detailed explanation because you see that Rebbe himself argued with his father. You see that Marba Ravashi argued with Ravash. It's the whole Shas is full of this. How many times is the Tur cholik with the Rosh? With the father. Al Koponim, this is the generic din that Eino Soseres Dvorov. Al Koponim, do you see where I'm leading? No. Okay.
Shulchan Karcha was ridiculous.
Yeah. Rabbi Yeshua. The Shoal Rabbi Yeshua. Shoal Yeshua in Shavuos and Dav Zayin. Shoal Yeshua ben Rabbi Akiva es Rabbi Akiva. Zokt Rashi that Rabbi Akiva had a son Yeshua. Who was Yeshua ben Rabbi Akiva? Zokt Rashi it was Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. That Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha was the son of Rabbi Akiva. Why? Who tells you that Rabbi Akiva was bald? Because Ben Azai, who later became a son-in-law of Rabbi Akiva, said that Kol Chachmei Yisrael Lefona Keklipas Hashum, they're insignificant. Chutz min haKereach Hazeh. He called Rabbi Akiva Kereach. Right? So Memela, Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha is the son of Rabbi Akiva. And Rashi holds like this because Rashi in Shavuos, Rashi in Ksubas, Rashi in Shabbos, Rashi in Psochim, Rashi in the Rashbam in Bava Basra, that all hold consistently that Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha was the ben Rabbi Akiva. Okay? Tosfos in all of these places disagrees. I'll tell very, very briefly why does Tosfos is machiach that it can't be. Because Tosfos says that Tosfos is very, very marich in Ksubas and Bava Basra, in Psochim. Tosfos says that it can't be because Rabbi Akiva did not marry the Bas Kalba Shavua until he was 40, and he went away to learn. Okay? So if Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha was the ben Rabbi Akiva, it means that even if he was born the first year of Rabbi Akiva's marriage, Rabbi Akiva lived to the age of 120. So how old was Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha at the time of Rabbi Akiva's Ptira? It was 80, right? It would have been 80, right? Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. And what? And the right, and the Gemara says in Kedushin v'zorach hashemesh u'bo hashemesh that Yom Shemeis bo Rabbi Akiva, right, is nolad Rabbi. That Rabbeinu HaKadosh was born on the day that Rabbi Akiva died. Rabbi Akiva, without the Yatzat, Rabbi Akiva is Yom Kippur. That's why we say Ar Zaru Ala Tzadik L'Shalev Simcha, because the Rosh Tevis right? Or Akiva, right? So Al Koponim, so Rabbi Akiva was nifter at the age of 120. At that time, at that day, Rabbi Nakadosh was born. So when Rebbe was born, how old was Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha? Maximum 80, right? He was 80. Right? He was a maximum of 80. That's if he was born in the first year of the marriage. And remember, then Rabbi Akiva disappeared for 24 years. Okay? So you have to make this much assumption here. The Gemara says in Megillah, in Daf Chavtes, the Gemara says that Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha was the Rebbe of Rabbeinu HaKodesh. He was a Rebbe. And he asked him, B'mea harachta yomim. He asked Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, B'mea harachta yomim. Okay, you live to this ripe old age. How did? So he told him he told him the skulas by which he reached this advanced age. Fine. B'shas petirosa Amar Rabbi Baracheni. When Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha was nifter, so he said to Rabbi said to him, Baracheni, bless me. He told him, you should live at least half as long as I live. Okay, fine. Okay, so the way that it comes out now, that if, assuming all the maximums, that Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha was born in Rabbi Akiva's 40th year. When Rabbi Akiva passed away, he was 80, right? Okay? He was 80, right? Okay? At that time, Rabbi was born. And Rebbe asked a bracha b'shas petirosa shel Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, right? And he told him Yirosa shetagia lechatzi yomai. So Rebbe at that time had to be at least 60 because he wouldn't have blessed him to live less than 70 years. What kind of blessing was that? So in other words, so Tosus is mochiach in kama mekoimas that it could not be that Rabbi Akiva son was Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. Couldn't be. Okay. Also, he rejects the idea that you should call him Karcha because of Kareach, but that's Agav. He says that it doesn't, that the whole Cheshbon doesn't make sense, that you would have made them to. It's not possible because all the maximums, Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, when he was Nifta, Rebbe had to be at least 60 years old. And for him to wish him that he should live at least until 70, and that what bracha is that? Everyone, Yemeshin Asena Bem Shivim Shana.
He lived in 140. Then.
Right. So he says it doesn't make sense. Okay. So obviously, the question that I'm asking is that Rashi says that Tana Dedan my Tama Lokoma Kereb Yeshua ben Karcha. Why doesn't that Tana learn like Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha that it's B'Moisach HaShvedish? So the Gemara says, what do you mean the lesle prozi? Zokt Rashi as what the Achronim Amedayik Avadi. He knew of the Gezeira of prozi. He knew of it. However. He did. We have a klal that logoma gezeira shava merabai. They not them done gezeira shava ma'atzme ela im ken kimbel merabai. A person can't make his own gezeira shava. What do you mean lo kimbel merabai? Could your Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha could Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha have had a better Rabbi than Rabbi Akiva? Understand? And he wasn't aware of the gezeira shava. Understand? He was the ben Rabbi Akiva according to Rashi. And he knew of the Gezeira Shava. He wasn't. What did he need? He didn't have to be mekabel at him. Kibbel merabe. You can't. How he couldn't even argue. Gezeira Shava isn't something that you can argue with. If your Rebbe tells you that he was mekabel such a Gezeira Shava, then he was mekabel the Gezeira Shava. What do you mean that? What do you mean that he wasn't mekabel it? So Memele, if Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, if our Mishnah is Amar Rabbi Yochanan Zu Divrei Rabbi Akiva Stimesah, and Rabbi Akiva says in the Mishnah that it's Mimois that Mukafim Chaim and Mimois Yeshua ben Nun, how could Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha reject the Gezeira Shava and say differently? Right? It's lo soiseres devarim, and this isn't even soiseres devarim. This is a Kabbalah. You don't need more than that. You don't need more than this. Isn't something. It's not a milsa the talyu betama or besvara, right? The Seder Adoros was Rabbi Chil Michel Halpern. What and he was the Rav in Minsk, at the time of the. He was in at the time of the Shagasaya. And again, they don't have time to go through much, but he shows historically, and he was a goy noilam. I mean that the Gdolei Achronim all said that he was among the greatest Bekiyim ever to live. That he knew that that phenomenal is beyond phenomenal, and he shows that Rabbi Akiva, that there's a basic mistake he holds that the Balei Tosfos have made here, that he says that they assume that Rabbi Akiva was not married prior to 40. And he shows from Midrashim and from Yerushalmi that Rabbi Akiva was married at the age of 18. He had a wife who was the daughter of Yeshua, okay? Because he had a brother-in-law. The Yerushalmi says that he had a brother-in-law, Yochanan ben Yeshua was his wife's brother, and he had a shver Yeshua, and therefore he named his son from his first wife Yeshua ben Karcha, and that son was born at the age of 18 or 19. Okay. And he says, because he says that Tosfos says in Psachim that Rabbi Akiva said, Kisha ha'isi amoretz, ha'isi oimet ten li talmid chochem v'anach shenek chamor. So the scene of so Tosfos says that's a mistake. He was a Shema Mitzvahs. Only the Amaratzim they resented the Talmidei Chachamim because they felt that the Chachamim denigrated them. But he was a Shema Mitzvahs, so Zokta that he shows from the Medrashim and the Ikar from the Yerushalmi that Rabbi Akiva married at 18. Rabbi Akiva married at 18, and he had a son who was named after his father-in-law, Yeshua, and that was Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. And so Memela, you adjust the cheshbonos that he could have been, that it would have all fit that Rabbi Akiva died, Rebbe was born, and many years later, Rebbe asked Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha for a brocha, and he told him, and I said, given a gesund langer Leben. It was many years, right? That's what he said. But what made me very, very confident in my question, that how could it be that Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha did not accept his father's limud, the Gzeresh? How could he say differently from the father? How could it be? Right? So listen. V'yesh oid k'tzas smach ki Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha hu ben Rabbi Akiva. The isa b'chelek, dar hamidbar ein lam chelek lo lam haba. The Mishnah says that the dar hamidbar doesn't have a chelek in olam haba. Divrei Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Lezer oime yesh lam shenema isvuli chasidei kasi brisi. Okay, so Rabbi Akiva says that the dar hamidbar, right, has a chelek in olam haba, and Rabbi Lezer, who was the Rebbe of Rabbi Akiva, says no. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha omer lo nema posik ze ela ala tzadikim shebechol dor korse brise ala zevach korse brise ela Hananya Mishal Vazaya ala zevach ela Rabbi Akiva v'chaveirav shemosra asman l'shchita al divrei Torah. So he says, so the Seder Adara says, is you see that Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha argues with Rabbi Lezer, and he agrees with the father that the Dara Midbar is yeshlam chelek l'olam haba, right? Uben yechabed av, right? Al kain darash al zevach al Rabbi Akiva aviv. So he says that you see here very, very clearly, and he brings other mamorim from the Chazal also, that he says that you see that consistently the Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha always followed Rabbi Akiva. So how could it be here? And befrat, it wasn't a limit. It was a gzera shava. It's only a question of Kabbalah. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha didn't know that his father was makabel the gzera shava, and that's the end of it. That's the din. The din is that the Karcha and Mekavim Chamem Memos Achashverosh, because Memos Yeshua ben Nun, because of the gzera shava. Prozi. How could he differ with the father? I wanted the emes, and maybe there'll be another occasion. I wanted to be told of this in the Machlokes of the Ramban and the Ran, but there isn't time for it. So listen what I'm going to tell you. This is known that B'shas Petirosa Amar Rabbi Bacheni, that all the Seder Adoros himself says, and the Raavad says in the Sefer Kabbalah, that yes, Rebbe was a Rebbe of Yeshua ben Karcha. Rebbe's primary Rebbe was his father, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. He was a Talmud of Reb Yeshua ben Karcha, but Leisik Ziknusa. He only came to learn by Reb Yeshua ben Karcha when Reb Yeshua ben Karcha was very elderly already, okay? And it wasn't a gift to the Yunkas, it was older. So listen, you remember the Mishnah, Shochet es Haveshet to Posek es Hagageres. Remember the Mishnah, that if the Shochet, he shechted one of the Simonim, the Veshet, right? And the Posek es Hagageres, but where he used a sakim pogum, because here there's a Machla Rashi and the Bahag. What does it mean here? What exactly did he do to make the animal treif? Rashi holds that he shechted it with a posel sakim, right? And the Bahag says that he tore out, he ripped out the other simon, and it's not a treifa. It's still halacha l'Moshe Messin. It's a gezeres hakosim that it's a nevela. In any event, so the Mishnah says that if there was a psul in the shchita, Rabbi Yesheva of Oma nevela. Rabbi Yesheva says that it's a nevela because you didn't shecht it properly. It's like Rabbi Akiva Oma treifa. And Rabbi Akiva says it's a treifa. Klala ma Rabbi Yesheva mishum Rabbi Yeshua kol shenifsala shchitasa nevela kol shechitasa keroi v'davar achad garam lo liposel treifa v'hodol Rabbi Akiva. He says, what does he say? Rabbi Yesheva said, okay. He said, no, you're wrong, because where the psul is in the shchit itself, then the behem is a nevela. A nevela is metame. The maga, the masa, right? The nevela is metame. A treif isn't metame. He says if the psul wasn't the shchita itself, it's a nevela. So shochet es haveshet to pasuk es hagageres is a nevela, right? Not a treifa. And Rabbi Akiva was choizer, and he was moide to Rabbi Yesheva that shochet es haveshet to pasuk es hagageres is a nevela, not a treifa. Okay. So the Gemara asks immediately that Rabbi Akiva is maskim that this is a nevela. He's choizer that it's not a treif, it's a nevela. Doesn't it say ele treifus bebehema nekuvas haveshet psukas hagageres? Right, and the Stam Mishnah is Rabbi Akiva. The Rashi says the Stam Mishnah is Rabbi Akiva, and you're talking about right where there was a psul in the shchita itself. Right, he didn't shecht it properly. And you call it treifa, so the Gemara matzach with many answers. That what does it mean here? If the Mishnah says that Rabbi Akiva was choizer and he was moided to Rabbi Yesheva, that any imperfection in the shchita is an avela. So what does it say? Ele treifus, and right away it says nekuvas haveshet psukas hagagras, which is an avela according to the Chazorah. So the Gemara has several theories, and the Stam Mishnah in Eila Treifus is Rabbi Akiva, right? Okay. So what? So obviously this for our inyonim. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabchia Barava Amar B'Yochanan. It's not. There's no puzzle here. Avad Rabbi Akiva was choizer, and Rabbi Akiva is me'al moida that nekuvas haveshet to psukas hagagares is not a treifa, it's an avela. So why does the Mishnah there say in Eila Treifus that it's treifa? It says why? Like kan kodem chazara, kan la'acha chazara. The Mishnah in Eila Treifus, although it's in the third parak, but that Mishnah was learned first, because Rashi says ein seder le Mishnah. That Mishnah was learned first, and that was before Rabbi Akiva was choizer to Rabbi Yesheva, and he held that nekuvas haveshet to psukas hagagaris, although it's a defect in the shchita alone, could be a treifa and not an avela. But kan la'acha chazara. But here, where Rabbi Akiva was moided to Rabbi Yesheva, that nekuvas haveshet and psukas hagagaris is a nevela, was after he argued, and Rabbi Yesheva convinced him that he was wrong, and he was maskim that any defect in the shchita is nevela, and it's metame b'mage masa, it's nevela, not treifa, right? Okay. And then Rashi explains, and when it says Umishna lo zozah memkom, why then why didn't Rabbeinu HaKodesh correct the Mishnah in Perek Gimel and say that Nekuvas Haveshet, the Psukas Hagagers, which is the Stam Mishnah of Rabbi Akiva, why didn't he say it's Nevela not Treifa? Why Eila Treifas? Because Mishnah lo zozah memkom. Since many years before Rabbi Akiva was Choizer, the Talmidim, the in Beis Medrash, will learn the Mishnah by rote, and they learned this nusach of the Mishnah that Psukas Hagagaris and Nekuvas Haveshet is a treifa. Mishnah lo zozah. We left the Mishnah as it was, and they made like a note, and to just understand, that no Rabbi Akiva was Choizer, and it's really a nevela, not a treifa. And this is a klal in Shavuos and Yevomas in several places where there are mishnayos that seem with the same Tana seems to contradict himself. It will say kan kodim chazara, kan acha chazara, u'mishnah lo zozah memkom. Since that, because they learned everything by rote, by heart, and it would be difficult. You're going to tell forget and learn it the nuva. So we left it as it was. Fine, okay. So memela zoknen azay. That over here, the emes is that the Mishnah goes according to Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva said, "Krochem mukfun chayma, read Megillah Tesvav." Okay, certainly there's no question because the Gemara dashens it from the Psukim. Okay, when Rabbeinu HaKodesh was Masada the Mishnah, Rabbeinu HaKodesh had not yet become a Talmud of Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. He had become a Talmud of Yeshua ben Karcha, and therefore, right? Therefore, they only knew one verse. They knew the Gezerah Shava of Prozi, because the Gezerah Shava of Prozi was well known. So Memela Rabbeinu HaKodesh, right? Rabbeinu HaKodesh thought that this is the only limit here. He wasn't aware of anything else, and he was Koveya in the Mishnah. The Ikar din was that it should be a separate day, Tesvav. Mimos Yeshua, Mimos Achashesh wasn't, as the Ramban says, wasn't really. It was only incidental. And Rabbeinu HaKodesh didn't know that there was a different opinion. He only knew of that there were those that said prozi. Later on in his life, when he became a Talmud of Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, he was makabel from Yeshua ben Karcha. You know what? That my father Rabbi Akiva wasn't makabel the Gezerah Shava. Then my father wasn't makabel that which my father said that you read on Tesvav. He only said Tesvav, but that which you added in the Mishnah in my father's associating with my father's opinion that it's Memos Yeshua ben Nun, that was a mistake because my father himself was not makabel the Gezerah Shava of prozi. But Rebbe didn't become associated with Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha until when? Until much later in his life. And at that time, the Mishnah had already been widely circulated. It was widely known. So Memela, although they held that the din is that it should be Mimos Achashverosh, because Rebbe learned from Yeshua ben Karcha le'ezik nusa that Rabbi Akiva really wasn't makabel the Gezerah Shava. And the Mishnah is a stam Mishnah lebeder Rabbi Akiva, but Mishnah lo zozah memkom. But we left the Mishnah as it is, rather than compel the Talmidim to be matriach that the Talmidim should. Okay, so Memela, and Memela is very good because the Yerushalmi says that halacha is Rabbi Akiva mechavero v'lo mechaverov, right? Mm-hmm. Right? We know that. And how could it be that Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha and Rabbi Yosef ben Rabbi Yehuda both hold Memos Achashverosh? So that would be against Rabbi Akiva. So the territories we have to say that Rabbi Akiva agreed with them as well. But Rebbe in his youth was not aware. That Rabbi Akiva held differently. He only knew of prozi, and therefore he was kavayat in the Mishnah. Later on, he became aware from Yeshua ben Karcha that that's not the case, that Rebbe, in fact, didn't darshan, he wasn't makabel the Gezerah Shava, and Rabbi Akiva held taka like Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, his son. The son was makabel from the father, not to darshan, not to learn the prosi, and therefore Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Shua ben Kocha held in one shita that the etzem adin is that it should be from Mimos HaChashverosh, and the Ramban says it should really be like this also, but it doesn't really matter because it's only an inyan of kovid anyway, right? That's what the Ramban says, right? And Mishnah Lo Zozim Im Karma, we left the Mishnah. So let me add one very bit, 2 minutes, that is it the Ein Yaakov? Who has the Ein Yaakov? Yeah, I have the Ein Yaakov. So remember that Tona Rabbonen Marosa Esther Shezimnes Haman. Why did Esther invite Yova Melech v'Haman Ayom El Amishta Asher Osisilo? And there's another Purim, if you'll come back, we'll talk about why the first Mishnah was Osisilo, and the second is Es Elohim, right? Well, okay. So, Rebbe Lezer Omer Pachim Toch Lalochta. Right? Rebbe Yeshua Omer Mebei Sovi Olomda. Shenema Imroiv Sanach Achilei Lechem. Bring him, right? And she learned from Shaul, because Shaul he felt very, very insecure with David HaMelech, and he brought David HaMelech, he felt, keep him under, close. Yeah, right. Reb Meir Omer Kidei Shelo Yitel Eitzav V'Yimrod. Reb Yehuda Omer Kidei Shelo Yakira Bashi Yehudis. Reb Nechemya Omer Kidei Shelo Yomer Yisrael Achos Lona Bebeis HaMelech V'Yasisa Datam Mina. Reb Yosef Omer Kidei Sheyei Motzula B'Chol Eis. Reb Shimon ben Asya Omer Shalom Ulaya. Reb Yeshua ben Karcha Omer Hizbira Loponim Kidei Sheyahareg Hu V'Hi. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, all of these go in order. From Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha was the last in chronology, right? Okay, Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha says, Kidei Sheyahareg Hu V'Hi. Okay, Zokt Rashi, what was that? Kidei Sheyehei HaMelech Choshda Mimeno. That she wanted him there, the Melech would be, as he was actually, he would be Choshesh that there was something illicit between Esther and Haman. He would become very enraged and he would kill both of them. And the Gemara in Tana says that when the Umas HaOlam, when they promulgated a Gezerah and one of the originators of the Gezerah died, the Gezerah became bottle. So her design was Haman should be killed, I'll be killed, Haman should be killed, the Gezerah will be bottle. Fine, that's what it is. Okay. So that's what Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha says. So listen, the hafla of a fella. Listen what I'm going to say. To me, it's hafla of a fella. I believe you're going to agree. The Mishnah says in the end of the third parak of Avos that it says that Rabbi Akiva says that Hakol Nitten Be'Roven and Hagaboyim Machzirim B'Kol Yom. Rabbi Akiva speaks about the whole existence of a man in this world and how a person has to understand. You remember you once from Rabbi Loel Lapian. Remember you know about the Arevim. What you remember? You played a tape for me once. Very, very on this mission was about a Mordecai Shmutz from Rabbi Loel Lapian. And Rabbi Akiva ends the Mishnah. That was the Mishnah of Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva ends Hakol Mesuken Lasuda. He says that what does it mean? The Batanura Mesuken that the person who's haskin asmacha beprozda kadesh tikonis letraklin, right? For that person, he's going to come when he comes to his final destination, his true reward. He'll find his Hakol Muchen Lasuda, right? Look, there's a Kabbalah from the Talmidei Baal Shem HaKodesh that Hakol Mesuken Lasuda means that the Sudas Purim has bekoyach to be mesaking everything. That the avoid of the Sudas Purim, and that's what it says, I don't have time, again, Purim, you'll come back, I owe you something, that you'll see in the Marva Shemesh that says that the two Sudas that Esther made were like the Shnei Seira Yom Kippur. That was the dogma, that one was the Soil Azozel, and one was the Soil Hashem, and the Soil Azozel, that these were the two Sudas. But I'll call upon him, and you see that there's a big, because all of the Tanoim that proposed reasons why Esther invited Haman, they were all reasons in why but this was, she said, no, that this is Sophie. It's going to finish. This is going to be the final solution to this, to this dilemma. that Hamel will be killed on the spot, I'll be killed and he'll be killed. So in other words, so Memela, there'll be no more problem. The Gezerah will be portal. No, who was the Tana that says Hakol Mesuken Lasuda is Rabbi Akiva? And the Talmid, the Baal Shema Kodesh say that the that it's Mesuken Lasuda, that the Suda Purim, the Purim Suda has the koach to be mesaken and to bring Yeshua's in the day Machsara Shayach Salo to the Klal and to the Prat. No, who was the son? Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha says that why was did Esther bring Haman to the Suda? Kidei she'asbir laponim she'ahareg hu v'hi. They should both be killed, and hakol muchen lasuda, and everything would be mesukin. The tsaras and the gezerah against the Klal Yisrael would be mesukin at the time of that Suda. So Mamela Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha is Beshitas Rabbi Akiva Oviv Amra, because the father said Hakol Mesukin Lasuda Zogen the Talmid Baal Shema Kodesh, that Hakol Mesukin Lasuda goes and that the koyach of the Sudas Purim and the Loshen and the Taz, we talk about it many times, that the Taz says that the Sudas Purim Sheikh Mirubo Chachomim V'Neviim Yosem Shabosas V'Yomim Toivim. How could it be that you're not Choyzer for Alanisim Sheikh Mirubo Yosem Shabosas V'Yomim Toivim, right? It's that hakol bin hakol moedim bepurim debina namelochem. Memela Rabbi Akiva said hakol mesuken l'suda that Sudas Purim has the koach to be mesaken everything. Who did Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha learn from? Mipnei ma zimna Esther lahamon kidei sheyahareg hu v'hi, and everything should be mesukim b'simchas Purim. That it should be that mishenichnas ad is mabim b'simcha, and that the simcha should be as it says that Rabbi Yonason says that the emes is if it wouldn't be for the chet of the maraglim, that the simcha wouldn't have ended. The simcha would go on and on and on until simcha. Until Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the Etzem Simcha, what the Mishnah says, Lo Hoyu Yom Tov L'Yisrael Ki Yom Kippur Chamisha Asa Ba'ov, and the Gemara says Yom Kippur is Avadas Yom Slicha Mechila, and so the Rabbi Yonason says that this would be the progression, that the Simcha that began Mishenichnas Adar would culminate Yom Kippur, but the Chet HaMeraglim intervened. So the Rebbeinu Shalom should help that that we should come back to the time that Marbin, that each month, whether it's Tammuz, whether it's Av, that it should be Marbin b'simcha, and that the schus of the Talmud Torah, in the schus of the mitzvahs and the masim toivim that the Klal Yisrael does, and befrat the mitzvahs ben odem lechavera that we are mekayim with Mesiras Nefesh Purim, that the Klal Yisrael should have only geulas and Yeshuas and shefa brachas b'chol mokum shahem amen v'amen. Rabbi Chananya ben Akashya Omer ich rotza kadosh baruch hu lezakas Yisrael leficha acher v'lem Torah mitzvah shenema v'chofetz l'mantzita. I apologize, I'm sorry it went over. How many didn't daven? I didn't know. Okay, we will come.